see. Antonio Morales, theathletic.com, joins us on 365 Sports, wrote a story about those who didn't quite have enough gas in the tank or the resume to make the playoff, and have they done enough to get to 2025? Antonio, thank you very much for your time. We know some of those teams. Who, in your opinion, who wasn't in, didn't get in, may be better set to get in this year, and why?
I think Miami probably is at the top of the list for me, just because they've added so many guys, and I think their schedule's manageable. I would say I think Alabama's probably the better team, but the schedule's going to be harder. SEC is more difficult than the ACC. So that's why I see some hangups coming in for those guys. Miami obviously added Carson Beck, added a bunch of receivers, hired a new defensive coordinator, Corey Heatherman from Minnesota. So I think there's some potential there to where they could maybe leap up and get in there this year.
Well, Antonio, on Miami, the defense was abysmal last year. Cam Ward was so good for them, but if not for the defense being so bad, this is probably a 12-1 team a year ago and an automatic make in the playoffs. How fast do you think they can improve that defense enough? Because I think Carson Beck is at least a little bit of a downgrade from Cam Ward, but can those things meet in the middle so that can happen for the Hurricanes?
Yeah, it's not like they didn't have talent last year. They were, I think, top 25 or top 30 in sacks and tackles for loss. So they were doing some good things. Just the secondary was a mess. And I think Corey Heatherman, Minnesota defensive coordinator, who did a really good job for the Golden Gophers last year, he came in and they really attacked the secondary in terms of trying to remake it and adding different personnel. Xavier Lucas from Wisconsin was a big get for them. Keontae Scott was a kind of big get for them as well recently in the spring portal window. They added, I think, the safety from Tennessee and the corner added the safety from Tennessee and some other players there. I know one of the safeties they got from Jacksonville State. I was talking to FBS head coach this spring, and they're like, "Yeah, he's one of the best players that we won that we didn't sign." So I think people are high on the players they've added in the secondary, and we'll see if they can combine that talent with the talent in the front seven to kind of turn things around defensively.
A team that has really gotten better as a program with Lane Kiffin as head coach, but they're always like one little, they bumped or stubbed their toe, but they are still very, very talented. They're a part of the SEC. How close or closer is Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss?
I don't know if this year's the year, just because they have to replace so much talent they lost last year. I feel like they pushed all the chips in from last year, and they showed how high their ceiling was. I think the issue with Lane before last year was they weren't beating the Alabama types. They weren't beating the Georgia types. Well, they beat Georgia last year. But then they lost to Kentucky. It was horrible. And they lost to Florida. And it's who was, an okay team at the end of the year. I know they were playing a lot better. They beat LSU, but that was still a team that Ole Miss should have beaten. And so I think, last year they're just kind of a strange team, one where, they showed you how high the highs could be and how ugly the lows were. And they just couldn't put it together for a whole 12-game season. And I think this year is more about kind of replacing all the talent they've lost. Like Trey Harris was a receiver they needed to replace, along with Jordan Watkins. So they went in the portal and grabbed a bunch of receivers. The secondary, I think they added 6 or 7 guys in the secondary as well this offseason. And then they lost a lot of talent up front, so they've attacked that area in the portal as well. And we'll see if all those new faces can kind of gel and coalesce to help them break through this year. But it's going to be tough. I feel like this year is kind of like a year to kind of replace and reset all the talent that they lost from last season when they went all in and kind of try to make a big playoff push.
You list UNLV as one of these teams. They were 11-3 last year. Now, granted, they did lose their quarterback, Haj Malik Williams, who came in and did so well with them. But they brought in Anthony Colandrea from Virginia. I know that Alex Orgy's in there. I would think that he's probably maybe more of a gadget player. But you think with Dan Mullen and his ability to kind of accentuate the athletic quarterbacks that could really make them not miss a beat?
Extended vehicle warranties. What is the waiting period? An extended car warranty or vehicle service contract usually has a set expiration. Warranty providers have introduced a waiting period. This waiting period lasts for 30 days or 1,000 miles. That means that your coverage only starts after the 30 days, or once you've reached 1,000 miles. Protect your vehicle. Sign up on Chase today.
Yeah, I think that could be really good. I'm a big believer in Dan Mullen. I covered Ole Miss when he was at Mississippi State. I saw kind of the work he did with that program at Mississippi State. He got them to number one for a couple of weeks a decade ago, and that was still talked about when I was over there. I think they're number one for 5 weeks the first year of the playoff. So he did a really good job there, and I know the Florida ending didn't go the way anyone wanted, and it's pretty ugly, but I mean, if you compare it to what Billy Napier's done so far, was it that ugly compared to what Billy Napier's doing right now? So I don't think his Florida tenure was all that bad. I think there was some recruiting questions, but he's always been a really good developer. I'm kind of curious to see how he attacks the job and roster building and roster construction now that he's at UNLV. A lot's changed since he was last coaching college football. NIL became a big thing. Transfer portal became a big thing. So like these things just weren't that prevalent when he was a head coach at Florida. Now they are. So I'm kind of curious to see how he does it. He was never known as an elite recruiter. I think what we're seeing right now is him taking flyers on guys who had like a really big recruiting pedigree. Guys like JoJo Earl from TCU, who was at Alabama and was like a top 50 recruit in 2021. Guys like Denver Harris, who was another top 100 guy in the 2022 class. Instead is like fourth program now. So we're seeing him take these flyers that are probably risky on these guys who have this big recruiting pedigree and were highly touted at high school but haven't put it together in college. And Dan Mullen's been known as a good developer. So who knows? Maybe if he hits on a couple of these former 4 or 5-star guys, that could really give them a boost.
Now, a school that we wondered as the season continued, now they did their bubble pop when they lost to Kansas and eventually ASU, but BYU was really good, and they were always just not in the picture despite what they were doing. Perhaps some of that was because no one expected them to be there, and they ended up, of course, smoking Colorado in the bowl game. Your thoughts about Kalani Sitake and BYU?
I remember seeing them play USC when I covered USC. I remember seeing them play BYU in 2019, and they just USC had lit up Stanford the week before, and everyone was really high on USC. And then Kalani Sitake just threw this junk defense at USC and shut them down and kind of slowed them down. That's when USC had Drake London, Michael Pittman, Amon-Ra St. Brown on the team, and they were able to slow them down. And they won the game in overtime. It was a pretty sizable upset. And so I've had a lot of respect for Kalani Sitake and kind of the work he's done and just the kind of consistency he's gotten out of that program. There's been the high highs with Zach Wilson and players like that, but he's maintained it. And I know the first year probably wasn't what he wanted in the Big 12, but they bounced back and had a really, really good season last year. I know they'll be in contention and people expect them to be in the mix for the Big 12 title. This season, I feel like the teams I wrote about that were on the bubble, I feel like they've relied on the portal less than the other ones, like Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss. They're going to be kind of counting on guys to develop some of the younger guys on their team. They're buying in some transfers like Andrew Gentry from Michigan to help out with the line. But I think for the most part, they're going to be counting on a lot of guys to develop. And we've seen BYU be able to develop guys. So I'm interested to kind of see what steps forward they take. They bring back a good amount from last year. So we'll see if they can take another step forward this year.
Do you have a reverse of this column coming, or can I ask you, do you think that there is a playoff team from last year that a lot of people think should be a lock that you don't really think, is as sturdy?
I don't know if there's any locks. I think it's obviously, I think Tennessee might take a step back. This is lost. Jalen Sampson and James Pierce and Omar Norman-Lott, guys who got drafted pretty highly this past year, and then they lost the quarterback the last minute. So that's a tough situation to deal with. And it's not like the offense was great last year anyway. So you lose your starting quarterback, your starting running back, who was really the engine of your offense, and then your top receivers. That's going to be tough to bounce back from. And Indiana I'm not like selling the thought of Indiana being solid. I think they'll be good. I think Fernando Mendoza's good. I like some of the additions they've made in the portal. But the schedule's tougher. It's just much tougher than it was last year. I think they play Oregon and Penn State this year, with some other games mixed in there. Go ahead.
No, it's interesting is that even like Alabama's on this list because we always knew that they were good enough to get in. And if they weren't, they were still probably by tiebreakers going to get in because of who they are, their reputation, and they've won a bunch of championships. They had such a topsy-turvy leaving from Saban leaving to DeBoer, but I did notice that they have not lost basically anybody in the portal, which means those who were there for DeBoer and or Saban who are still hanging around are all in. What are your thoughts about the Crimson Tide with Georgia and Texas apparently the gold standard right now in the SEC?
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting year personnel-wise for them. Ty Simpson, Henry Brigham, he's the favorite to win the starting quarterback job right now. I think Ryan Grubb, the new offensive coordinator, who's been with Kalen DeBoer for a long time, he was with the Seahawks last year, and he's rejoining DeBoer this year in Tuscaloosa. They did great together at Washington, Fresno State, and places like that. And he said after the spring, it looks like Ty Simpson, he's like, if we had to play tomorrow, Ty Simpson would start. So it looks like Ty Simpson has a leg up on that race. And I think having Ryan Grubb back with DeBoer will really help the offense just from a continuity perspective and play calling. DeBoer's guys back in there calling plays, so I think that'll help. And then they added Isaiah Horton from Miami, a productive receiver last year for the Hurricanes. Then they've attacked tight end because their depth was kind of low there, and I know they've added a couple offensive linemen. But I think they're just trying to make life easier around the quarterback because if they're going to break through and make the playoff with a new quarterback, a first-year starter, they're going to need to make things easy for them and kind of make the situation as ideal as they can. So I think that's been their main focus. They didn't add a lot defensively in the portal. They've added guys, but more to shore up depth than, hey, we need this guy to be an impact player. So it's pretty, status quo in terms of them kind of relying on their talent and just supplementing some needs here and there as opposed to kind of cutting 20 plus transfers or something and try to remake a roster.
Antonio, making sure, because I know The Athletic, you guys cover a bucket load. Are you also on the USC beat?
I'm going to be transitioning to a new beat, kind of focused on roster construction.
Okay.
The portal and recruiting and everything like that.
Well, I asked you that because I know that you have a lot on your timeline about what Lincoln Riley's done. We had a high school recruiting analyst on earlier today, and it was almost like, oh, damn, there are still rankings for high school football. USC's they're on a heater right now. What's changed?
Yeah. They've emphasized Southern California, recruiting Southern California a lot more. I know somebody will probably hear that and be like, well, it's obvious. They should have been doing that. Well, under Lincoln Riley, they really weren't. So they were recruiting Texas a lot and Georgia and everything like that. And sometimes you recruit those states and sometimes you get the guys and sometimes most of the time, actually, you're going to lose to Georgia and Texas when you're recruiting Georgia and Texas. And so USC would go out to these states, out of their backyard, and then they would lose these recruiting battles, which people expected. It's going to be hard to beat Georgia for a defensive lineman from Georgia, especially with the way Georgia's producing NFL draft picks. USC doesn't have that pedigree right now, even though I think their defense staff is good. So, we kind of took this kind of misguided approach to recruiting and really emphasizing out-of-state kids. And now I think Chad Bowden, the new general manager at USC, has stepped in. They hired him from Notre Dame, and he's really emphasized Southern California and recruiting their backyard more. And it's really paid off. I think they have by far the most amount of commitments in the country. I think they have 27 commitments. I think the next most is 15 by Notre Dame and Syracuse or something. So they have by far the most commitments, which is kind of boosting their ranking right now. But they have 16 commitments from California kids. I think last year they only signed 4 kids in California. So there's just a lack of emphasis on recruiting the backyard or recruiting locally. And we've seen a shift this cycle. And I also think they're more aggressive with NIL too. I think that's been a big a big point of emphasis as well. Just being more aggressive in that arena, like we've seen some schools in the past. So I think those are kind of the two main things that really stand out to me.
Thank you, man. Antonio, good stuff. When you get the next one up, we'll be following you, of course, on your timeline. We'll bring you back on. We appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That's Antonio Morales, theathletic.com.